Laurel Douglas, and I'll be hosting the session today. And I'm, as the CEO of Women's Enterprise Centre, I'm very thrilled to be hosting this event today. This is my first event, so bear with me. Normally, much more skilled people do this than I. I am as the CEO, I oversee our activities in our Kelowna, Vancouver, and Victoria office, and our role is to help women business owners throughout all of BC, and we provide loans and training and business advisory services and mentors and workshops and webinars and these phone-in sessions. And our passion is to empower women entrepreneurs to their business success. We're a nonprofit, and we're funded mainly by the federal government. And we have a wonderful website, womensenterprise.ca, and you can sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. So remember to have a pen and paper handy, and we're just going to jump right in now. Today's topic is Equality Matters, My Feminism, and we have three BC Changemakers here who are going to share their insights with us. Last year, feminism was declared the word of the year by Merriam-Webster dictionary, so that's pretty cool. And this year, the Canadian theme for International Women's Day is #MyFeminism. So Status of Women Canada, if you go on their website, they want you to share what feminism means to you. So we thought we'd help you by unpacking what feminism means in 2018 and learn more about the status of gender equality in BC today. So, as I said, we have three women on a mission to achieve gender equality in BC with us today. Fiona Macfarlane is the Chief Inclusiveness Officer at Ernst & Young, which is a global leader in insurance, tax, transaction, and advisory services, a very major accounting firm, international. And Fiona has an external role, and she spreads the message about how diversity and inclusion in the workforce are important for the health of all businesses. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you.
And we also have Jill Earthy. She's the Chief Growth Officer at FrontFunder, which is a fintech equity crowdfunding platform. She's also the board chair of Women's Enterprise Centre, so she's my boss, so I better do a good job today, just saying. She's also very active in the women's movement in BC and is the co-chair of the We for She Forum, which you'll hear more about later. And the third speaker is Lois Nahirney. Lois is the president and CEO of DNA Power, a personalized DNA testing service. She's also the co-chair of We for She, and she has many other roles, including chair of the Premier's Women's Economic Council, and she chaired, and I believe still chairs, the Women's Executive Network in BC. So she's a very busy woman as well. So welcome and thank you all for joining us today. Today we're going to learn what feminism is in 2018, and then we're going to learn about the 4 Ps of parity, which I thought were 5 Ps, so I've made a new one up. So the first P is the problem. What is the gender gap, and what are some stats that might surprise you? The second P is progress, our achievements in BC as a leader in gender equality. The third P is plan. That's actions you can take in your own life and business and community wherever you are in BC, and how that would be great for you to join in. And then praise. Praise is sharing examples of successful diversity programs and what you can learn from them. And the fifth one I thought of was prosper, because if we do all those things, then we'll prosper. All of us will, the entire economy and society. So Fiona, let's get started with you. As I said, feminism was the word of the year in 2017. It was the top look-up throughout the year. It had several spikes that corresponded to numerous news events nationally and internationally. So if you look it up in the dictionary, feminism is defined as the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. And it's also defined as organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. So can you unpack for us what feminism means in 2018 and why you think it was the word of the year in 2017?
Well, thanks for having me. I think that it's about political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. So this is not about one sex being more powerful than the other. And I think sometimes people misunderstand feminism and think that it's about putting men down, and it's not. It's about equality. The reason it's so important is obviously it's really important to our economy. There's so much untapped talent in our economy, and the potential for really driving our GDP, if we did include women fully in our economy, and that would be good for everybody. It's good for men, women, for the philanthropic sector, for every aspect of our society. And so it's hugely important and should be something that we all push hard for. And our hashtag this year is Press for Progress. Why has it become such an important, or rather a trending term? I think it's a confluence of so many social actions that have caused it to I call it the dung beetle, or the dung beetle effect, that as it grows it gathers more, or if you're Canadian it's the snowball effect. You can tell I'm African. So the Women's March, sexual harassment started out coming out in the media, in arts. It's now in the corporate sector and government, and that gave rise to the Me Too campaign. And I think it's really brought many of the social inequities that we all know about. It wasn't a surprise to most of us, but it's brought it front and center, and it's given it the kind of focus that it needs. And we've known about the pay equity gap, the slow progress in corporate Canada and on boards, and hopefully getting it so that it is really a topic that everybody talks about, hopefully that talk will lead to action.
So in your opinion, is 2018 status quo? Is there, what is your take on the stage we're in right now in terms of gender equality? It's been, it's been over 100 years.
Yeah.
Where are we now? What's the?
Well, I would say we aren't anywhere, but we have potential to make a difference. So, as with any other social movement, you can talk about it, and you can talk about it, and everybody will think that that's some sort of proxy for action, or you can act on it. So, if it acts as an inspiration for people to behave differently, then we will make progress. If not, progress will remain at the kind of glacial pace that it's been. And so I'm hoping that the talk, and what a wonderful day to have this discussion, I'm hoping that will galvanize every single person listening and who cares about our economy and cares about equity, that we do something different. We use it as a catalyst for that.
So Jill and Lois, do you have any other comments on the state of feminism in 2018, or why feminism was the word of the year last year?
I would obviously very much agree with Fiona. I think we're at, I feel this a little bit each year, that we're taking a little bit of a step forward, and sometimes we feel like we're taking a step back. But I think all of these different initiatives and the power of voice and the power of truth that's being talked about, and that there's creating space for people to have these conversations, men and women, and I think that is such a critical piece for us moving forward, is it has to be men and women working together. We can't silo ourselves, and we need to make sure we're empowering the men to join the conversation. But I'm optimistic that we're going to make change, but there's a lot more work to do. It's about tangible action.
Hi, it's Lois here, and I just love we have International Women's Day. It's one of my favorite days because we really just get to celebrate.
Can we also share that it's Lois's birthday today?
Well, I guess the bonus that I get to celebrate my birthday on International Women's Day. I tell you, I have so much fun on this day because it's about fabulous women and getting together and celebrating who we are, the progress we've made. And so truly, I just find it so much fun. I just love, and I hope wherever you are in the province that you find some way today to connect with just wonderful people and wonderful women and just celebrate, what we're doing to create a fantastic world. So, it's always fun, and I just love it. And I would have to say that this last year is the first year after 25 to 30 years of slogging it through for me in male-dominated industries where I really feel like I'm starting to see and feel a shift. I just can't believe that it's not just us having the conversation. Yeah. Finally, there were so many years it felt like it was just those of us who have kind of been through it, experienced how tricky it was to make progress, and it kind of over our careers realized this is way harder than it should be, and we haven't moved the dial on the numbers, and that now I feel like the conversation is out there. So for me, the tipping point is with feminism is that we are talking about the issue. As Fiona said, though, the whole thing is now about the action. And so for us, when we think about our feminism in 2018, when you think about your feminism today, what are you doing today to be an active champion, to be an advocate, to be a sponsor, to be an enabler of yourself and of women and girls around you? And I would just say find something that you can do today to encourage, support, recognize someone around you. And that's about feminism, and that's about celebrating today and just making sure every day we're taking a step. That's how we'll make change.
So thanks, Lois. You mentioned we're at a tipping point, and that leads me to the next question, which I'm going to address to you. So we're going to move into the 4 Ps of parity, and the first one is the problem. So what is the problem here? What are we trying to address? What is the gender gap? And can you point to some areas in particular and maybe some implications for this problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just spoke optimistically.
Oh, excuse me. Do you mind if I just interrupt? If you're just calling in, or if you're just tuning in to us now, if there's any way you could mute your line, that would be really helpful. We have about 67 people on the line, and we can't seem to mute you from this end. So thank you. Go ahead, Lois.
Yeah, great. Well, I spoke optimistically a moment ago, but I also have to say at times I get really concerned and discouraged because we've been working at this and talking about it and trying to address it for so long. And I know when I graduated from high school, I believed I lived in an age of equality. Every year that it progressed, I realized that really was not how it was, that most of us had to work harder, be better, and actually got held back in situations that we shouldn't have. It was just more difficult when you're the only woman at the table for decades to be able to influence or make the progress or get the promotions or the recognition that you'd like. So when I look at the stats and see how little they've moved, that worries me. So the stats worry me, and I think we have to look at those metrics on an ongoing basis. And if any young woman coming up now thinks that the problem is gone, it is not. There is so much inertia in the system in terms of the structures that we have that hold us back, and in terms of our culture and our thinking. And that's a challenge. So we really need to be working actively at this continuously.
So Lois, at the pace we're going now, when will we reach gender equality? If all of these activities from 2017 and 2018, including the gender budget, which the federal government just released, they talk about gender on almost every page of that 367-page document. Gender results framework, gender-based analysis, gender budgeting, gender everything. So, if we just stay at the same pace now, how long will it take to get to equality?
I'm going to give you 2 different stats. If there's a stat that says if you just look at the top companies in Canada or the top companies that are corporations, it will take them 75 to 100 years to achieve equality. But that's our biggest and most progressive companies. If you look at the studies from the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report, those studies show that research equality in the overall workplace in Canada will take over 200 years to achieve parity based on today's progress.
So if we keep going,
just dropped.
So if we keep going at the same rate, it'll take over 200 years for Canada to have a really gender equal country, society, in terms of wages and so on.
Exactly. And then there's lots of other stats then that support that. So many of you who are on the line will know some of these stats. Things like, in terms of pay, the average woman who works full-time earns 74.2 cents for every dollar earned by a man. Like, that's not okay. Some organizations are starting to address that, but I've seen it and experienced it personally, and we have got a gap. We've got 47.3% of the workforce is women, but they're only 5.3% of the CEOs. You know, that's not possible when we are coming out of university and high school with higher grades and higher numbers, and yet we're getting less in terms of pay and jobs and promotion.
So many people call that I forget what they call it, the trickle-down effect or something, that, you know, yes, at the beginning of the pipeline there's lots, but it takes a long time for them to get to those positions. Do you believe that it's just a matter of time or not?
No, I mean, it's not, because there are systemic things that occur at every stage, and I come out of the human resources field, so I could talk just a whole hour just on what we need to change in HR, on how you post a job, what words are used, how it's presented, how women and men apply for jobs, how we screen them, how we interview them, and how we develop and how we promote.
But we're talking mostly to women entrepreneurs in our audience, so there's also gender inequality that they face. And so just from my own experience, I know that the most recent research, Canada-wide research, shows that the average woman-owned business has $180,000 in business debt, while the average male-owned business has $350,000 of business debt, which means that either A, women are borrowing less because they need less, which could be true, or B, they can't get as much as they need, or C, they don't ask for enough. And I personally believe that all three of those things are factors, but that's another aspect of the problem, is just the fact that women entrepreneurs aren't getting enough fuel to grow their businesses, and that's something we need to address from top down and bottom up.
Well, some of that is risk-based in terms of that women take actually more sensible risk. They aren't more risk-averse, they are sensible risk people, and which is why you need more women in business, because I think we'd have less volatile stock markets, businesses, etc. But Jill really understands the numbers in terms of financing for women.
Yes, I was just commenting on Laurel too. I mean, I think part of it is too the system was set up a certain way, right? The system was set up in a way that was designed to look at, certainly in the financing for entrepreneurs, look at certain business types, certain business qualities, and that doesn't always apply to women. And so there's a lot of work being done right now on how do we adjust that system to make it more inclusive, so that more women-led companies can benefit from accessing that financing. We know that in Canada, too, that less than 4% of venture capital funding goes to women entrepreneurs. And those are companies that potentially are high growth. And so it is now, I mean, there are more conversations now happening around different alternative models of financing. We know that women tend to, because of their risk sensitivity, want a balance of debt and equity. Don't want to take on too much debt, don't want to take on too much equity, but there's a balanced approach, and that actually, the great thing with that is actually the outcomes are much stronger. There's data, the first round capital report, that says that the investors will receive a 63% return on investment. That's significant. But one of the pieces, and we'll get into this, is what I find interesting is there's so much data now showing how important it is to have diverse workforces, to have diverse types of businesses, diverse people around the table, but yet we're still not seeing change. And I feel like certainly in the last couple of years, as more data has become available, we're the business case is so clear.
So I don't want to dwell on the problem, but I do want to point out a couple other aspects that might be relevant to the women business owners on the line. And one of them is that while women are starting businesses at a faster rate than men, on average, women-owned businesses have about half the revenues of male-owned businesses, and only 10% of small businesses in Canada export, but women export at half the rate of male-owned businesses. So we do have an opportunity there. And Fiona, just to bring you into the conversation about the problem, we also see, and Ernst & Young has released research about this, that while women-owned firms with revenues under 250,000, there's a lot of those, and then there's quite a number of women-owned firms that are over the $1 million range, but there's that missing middle of women-owned businesses that don't ever get, from here to there, from 250,000 to over $1 million in revenue. Is that still an issue today? Is that still part of the problem? And what are some options?
It is part of the problem, and one of the things we found is, and I think Lois alluded to it, is the playing field isn't level. And we had some research done as part of our Entrepreneur of the Year program, and we couldn't figure out why women weren't applying, and when they did apply, they didn't win because they didn't tend to have the same revenue as the men and the same brand. And it came down to two things, and they're linked. The first is access to network. As you get more and more successful, the more important network is network to customers, network to influencers, network to financiers, and that then ties into access to capital. And so we started a program called Entrepreneurial Winning Women, which provided women entrepreneurs with that access to network and a sort of a sisterhood, so they could support each other, inspire each other, and the results were just off the charts. One of the examples that I love to use is the Swell bottles. She was an entrepreneurial winning woman, and her business just took off when she got access to really a level playing field. So.
Right. So there's a lot of factors in the problem. The problem isn't just money. It isn't just existing practices. It's also sometimes access to networks and sometimes our own mindset. So we don't dwell on the problem too long. Let's just move along to the second P, which is progress. So Jill, BC is a leader in across the country in what's happening here in terms of advancing gender equality. What are some achievements that have been made in BC that you can share with us today?
Yeah, we're very fortunate here in this province. One, I think it just stems from collaboration, right? We've talked about that a lot. There are so many incredible organizations in this province doing good work on this problem, whether it's Women's Enterprise Center, the Minerva Foundation, so many others, but there's a collaboration effect that's happened so that we're actually aligning and linking the dots, which is moving everything forward.
So in terms of that collaboration, what is an organization that some of these mentor advisory forum participants, some of you women on the line, could possibly tap into if you're interested?
Yeah, so the Minerva Foundation is one, of course, and they did the Face of Leadership report. They've done it each of the last few years, where they're recognizing 28 CEOs have now signed the Diversity Pledge, where they're actually making an active action to actually move the dial forward. And
so out in the communities around
smaller
the
communities,
they could take, you could get this Face of Leadership report and then perhaps approach some of the larger employers in your community and encourage them to connect in with it. Yeah. And what about the Web Alliance? What's that? There's members. There's women's business networks around the province that may not be part of that.
Yeah, so the Web Alliance is a great example of over, 30 now organizations throughout primarily the Lower Mainland and now growing to other parts of the province to link in, to understand and support each other. So I think that's a great opportunity in different communities throughout the province to new groups cropping up. That
so this is like a consortium of all the different women's networking groups who realize that it's better to link into a bigger group because then you can achieve more. And in fact, the Web Alliance was very instrumental in helping the Premier create a Women's Economic Council.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's interesting to note too now, our province now, of course, we have a gender balanced cabinet, so the provincial government is certainly recognizing the importance of this too, and just a couple of weeks ago there's a new parliamentary secretary for gender equality, which is quite phenomenal. But going back to your point, Laurel, I think that means with all of these organizations throughout the province working together on this problem and now having, being able to be a voice that can go to the government with recommendations, that will also help to position BC in a positive way.
I can think of a couple other examples of progress. Lois, can you think of a couple more too?
So what I'm loving to see is that so many companies like Fiona's at Ernst & Young and all the major companies are coming out with their own individual research and their reports on what is different and what can they do to move the dial in their own organization. So I'm always really proud and impressed when I see companies taking this on and trying to make a difference in those areas. So it's always great to see that banks are taking some actions as well. There's new lending programs for women. So we're getting a lot of different things that are starting to happen. And of course, we'll talk a bit about it later, but we're proud of We for She as well in terms of how do we start even at a younger level, getting young women in high school thinking about where they're going. And to me, that's a level of progress in starting this conversation and that action younger.
Yeah, so there's, I mentioned the gender, I call it the gender budget because it was so focused on gender equality. You will probably never see a budget like that again in the history of the country. And then there's also the announcement that was made today, it was made in the budget that Business Development Bank of Canada has had $1.4 billion additional funding provided to it in order to lend more to women entrepreneurs. And they were also given a couple $100 million more to provide venture capital to women entrepreneurs. So these are some examples of progress. I would say there's other examples of progress around financing women entrepreneurs, such as some impact investment funds that are trying to target women-led businesses and do that analysis with the gender lens. And I know that there are lots more opportunities coming up for people to get financing. Today there is an announcement, you may want to look into it, that the organization, our national association, Women's Enterprise Organizations of Canada, has just entered a deal with Business Development Bank to help more women entrepreneurs access that new capital that BDC has. And if you work with Women's Enterprise Centre in BC, we actually are able to provide special access to those funds with some preferred rates and with some preferred terms. So those are all good things. Fiona, can you think of any examples of progress that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I can, my day job is managing the practice and my night job is the Chief Inclusiveness Officer. And that role is really to be an advocate to get this onto the board and CEO agenda as a business issue, as a talent issue. And I would say there were times that I felt really discouraged because it was seen as more of a sort of philanthropic, let's be kind to women kind of issue. And I've now, in the last year or two, started to see more sophisticated discussions from CEOs and boards, realizing that this is about talent, this is about businesses being better. So it's anecdotal, but I'm so optimistic that we are finally getting the right conversation. And when we have men, because most of the CEOs are men, and most of the boards are men, when we have men understanding and talking about it as a talent issue, we will make progress.
Absolutely.
Well, even the McKinsey study that came out recently that demonstrated that if we actually enhance women's participation in the labor force, it will contribute an additional $150 billion to the economy or to GDP by 2026. So if we just keep using those numbers and just keep proving the point and making it is an economic opportunity for all.
Yeah, and I think just one one thing that I thought is really positive is when you look at the World Economic Forum and the gender education gap. Canada closed that gap in 2013, and we're number one in the world in gender equity and gender achievement, employment, education, and it's easy for me to say, education accomplishments in gender. And so we've got the raw materials there. And so it's just now time for us to translate that into a tremendous ROI for our economy.
Yeah, so even I think that the listeners might be interested to know just how important women-owned businesses are to the economy. And the latest data I have is from RBC Economics from 2011, which says the aggregate contribution of majority women-owned businesses in Canada is $148 billion. So, I think the progress that's also being made is that these things are getting measured more.
Yeah.
And what you don't measure, you don't do. And so that's also very encouraging because the recent budget also talked about how important, as you say, Fiona, women are to solve the upcoming labor shortages in this country, because there are so many high-paying jobs and high-profit industries that women can get involved with. So this is great news. So we've made some progress. We've got some attention. Many companies understand that unconscious bias is at play. Many companies are getting trained to realize that what they're doing that's sort of unconsciously making the playing field not level for women or for minorities or for any other equity group. And a Women's Enterprise Center has some training to help people understand what unconscious bias is, and we are able to present those workshops anywhere around the province if people are interested in having groups of employers get together and learn about that. And lots of companies are sharing their information. This isn't a closed, it's a competitive advantage for everybody, but they're not treating it as a secret. Everybody's sharing their gender training. In fact, Microsoft even has all of their unconscious bias training online. You can access it for free. So there's lots of sharing in this space. So let's go to our next P. And the third P of parity is planning. So this is actions you can take in your own life, business, and community. And I think this is where we should probably take a moment and talk about the We for She movement in BC, which is quite a unique movement. So which one of you two would like to? Jill, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, you mentioned the Web Alliance before, and that the group of collaborative women's business networks representing women entrepreneurs, women lawyers, women in finance, a wide range of women's groups doing great things. And so they came together, this was 5 years ago, which is hard to believe, to create the first, originally BC Economic Forum Women as a Catalyst for Growth event. Some of you may have been there. We did have a number of women from around the province participate. And the focus was on how can we take action together? How can each of us as individuals, as each of us within our organizations or as entrepreneurs building companies, and even advocate to government for this. And so it's evolved. And in the last 2 years, we've had the opportunity in partnership with the province of BC to engage young people, so young women in grades 10 to 12, to join us from around the province, and that's really powerful. So northern communities from the island, so they're at that really pivotal point of deciding on their career trajectory, thinking about the future, what types of post-secondary education or not that they want. And so we've been able to bring in about 700 young women in each of the last 2 years to participate alongside men and women, hence the we and we for she, for mentorship, for inspiration, and for education, because and exposure, I guess, is also a really critical piece to different types of careers, that anything is possible, and as we sometimes say, you need to see it to be it. So exposing them to different types of role models, and that's been really, really critical. And out of that, our really important piece for us is that inspiration piece, but more importantly, how are we each going to take action? So maybe Lois can share some of the actions that have come out of it.
Yeah, it was really, when we did our first session in terms of generating what will really move the dial and what action can we take. I'll talk later about a few of those things, but to continue on the youth piece, we realized if we couldn't influence young women when they were making choices out of high school, that this problem would persist. And so we were so delighted to partner with the province to be able to bring young women from around all over BC together to really say, how can you step up and be bold in your career? And so working with them and with the senior business leaders and the younger women there, we said, what can we do and what can you do to promote equal opportunities for women, and what actions can you take? And so we came up with something, together with them. They came up with something simple about the actions they can take, and it was basically, we need to speak up, we need to step up, and we need to act up. And so in terms of speaking up, we have to dare to be ourselves, call out stereotypes, ask tough questions, and talk to boys and men about equality. We want them to step up every single day to take on leadership positions. Just say yes. Be a role model, empower and don't compete, and champion the women around you. And finally, act up. Set some goals, take on tough challenges, explore non-traditional areas and bold careers, and encourage people to consider and act on equity issues. So we said, be the change you want to see in the world. Start thinking now about how you can make a real difference. And that applies not only to the young women, but to every one of us here.
Right. So that plan, the plan part of this conversation, I think it was very unique in terms of the way that plan was arrived at, because as Jill said, hundreds and hundreds of high school girls joined hundreds and hundreds of business leaders from around BC and sat at tables and talked about the issues. And they came to these three conclusions about what they need to do and what we as women around the province need to do in order to do our part in making sure that gender equality becomes more and more of a reality. And that involves some other things. And so if those are the big buckets that we need to look at, what are some of the specific action plan items that the people have come up with over the last few years that really need to be addressed, and who needs to do what?
Yeah, so we can share these.
Yeah, so I want to take a step back and just say, when we started it, we realized we needed to approach three different levels. We needed to approach change at the individual level, but at the business level and the government level as well. So as we've been building out and collecting from people what's the action we can take, we did address it at all three levels. And so we've talked right now about the individual level. We also have been working to develop what are tools that businesses can use, and we'll talk to that in just a second. But I do want to share something that most people won't see because it's not as apparent, but because of this work, we were able to spend quite a lot of time with government and saying, what is the government doing to ensure that every program you develop, everything that you put out actually considers things from a woman's lens. And we had the chance through the previous Women's Economic Council, through We for She, to be able to hear from and hear government programs from almost every ministry, and then to ask them and to say, how is this addressing, promoting, and supporting women in our province? And even though government is quite equal in its representation, many had not thought about that lens. And we were really pleased and proud to see them come back to us months later and say, here's the action we've taken, here are the things we're doing. And so while that people might not see that, it was wonderful to see that government, through the recommendations of We for She and the actions of our great corporations like Ernst & Young, are starting to take action to make a difference. And so the government part was was important. But there's also now the plan around what are the actions that we can do from more a business perspective. And Jill, do you want to maybe just talk through what those include?
Yeah, so a number, I mean, there are a couple key ones, but, you know, the champion, I wonder if we, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
This one or this one? Yeah, so we're just looking, sorry, we have so much information. But, I mean, a really key one, we've narrowed it down to 5 key ones. And the first one is around activating men and making sure that men are active participants and critical partners in each conversation, and that we really do need that to collectively shift the dial.
And that actually emerged this year.
Yeah.
That's been one of the action plan priorities for the last few years. But this year, the however many people there were, 1,500 or so people at We for She in November in Vancouver, that was the one they identified as the most key thing that needs to be done this year.
And I think that maybe I could just give a little practical example of what we did when we, based on activating men, when we were doing some really cool training for women in our firm, we said you can't attend unless you bring a male colleague. And so there was a really great dialogue between these men and women that really advanced their working relationships. So that kind of thing that you can do.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Because often men want to be included in the conversation, and they just don't know how.
Yes.
Such a great example of us making sure that we each are including them in the conversation. And even male business leaders need to know that they can take the lead. Just as a side note, I think some of us were at Michelle Obama when she was in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, and she's certainly one of my role models. But she had a clear ask for the men in the room, just around, look, you know, how you treat the daughters that may be in your life, or the nieces, or, you know, and how you expect that they can do anything, which I think the majority of men do think. You need to apply those same principles in your work, and that all of your employees need to be treated the same way. And it was just a little mindset shift, and I think that certainly the men that were sitting around me seem to have.
Well, what she said was you need to make room at the table.
Yes.
And I would also say, and this kind of leads into one of the other actions out of the 5 actions in the current action plan. The other thing we need to do as women is take the room at the table.
Yeah.
And so we know through Women's Enterprise Centre's work delivering the Taking the Stage program throughout BC that women tend to take up less physical space at the table than men do. We cross our legs, we cross our arms, we minimize the space we take up. And so we can do our part by taking space at the table while they're making space at the table.
Yeah.
So that's
and the clear distinction is we all want to be at the same table.
Yeah.
And that's a really critical piece as we move forward. So no, that's a good point. So the next round, I mean, there are a number of concrete examples around that, but I think it's being mindful of that, and even
that would make of including men.
Of including men in the conversation.
Yeah. So what's the next one?
The next
one is about championing women, and it's interesting because the very first recommendation is take charge of your career and your education and learn to negotiate. And so, to your point, if we need to take up space at the table, the whole point is step up and really own your career in a very proactive way. And in doing that,
or own your business vision and the possibilities that you would like to see realized for to have your business potential get actually realized.
Well, you know, if I maybe just build on a little bit on that, because I've been thinking about this a lot. Sometimes when you say to that to women, they go, well, it's just me, and it's not, you know, if I don't do it, it's just me that's hurt. If you think about the message you're sending to all those young women, if you don't do it, who will?
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, they won't see it. And so it matters, it really matters.
Well, on a personal note on that, to your point as well, Laurel, is that I've got my own business right now, and I'm a startup, and I come from the corporate world, and I want a big, successful business. But even almost every day, I have to stop myself from saying, okay, what would a guy do in this situation? Because I need to be sure I'm playing a bit bolder and bigger and really putting it out there. And I know all the stats. I know all this information. I've done an executive career, and I even find for myself, I have to say sometimes, how can I be sure that I am playing as big and bold as a male who is in a similar situation as I was? And I surprisingly use that as my point to say, what action do I need to take now? Am I doing as much as I should do?
Yeah.
And that's helping me step up.
We only have about 5 more minutes to finish off this section, so that really ties into one of the other actions in the plan, which is to create positive and self-affirming mindsets. I might call you a little bit on that and say, okay, you can think about what a bold thing a man would do, but you also have to be true to yourself, and you have to, make sure that you're doing the bold thing that you want to do for yourself. So we have to, we're not, gone are the days where we have to try and become men.
No.
We have to become ourselves, but we have to make sure that incorporates every possibility.
And I love that you say that, because I think too much in the career that I came through, we had to look like the men at the table in order to succeed, other than with lipstick and heels. And we don't want to do that. We do want to own it, because women will bring, the whole point is that women bring a different perspective to the table that will make us stronger in business, that produces better results.
So you mentioned the negotiation, and you can't negotiate effectively without a positive and self-affirming mindset. And it's very interesting that the negotiation mentor advisory forum that recently took place was the most well-subscribed event that we've had in this format. So 279 women signed up to sit in on one of these conference calls to learn about negotiation. So we have hired a leading expert in negotiation to create a workshop for us that we're going to be taking around the province and sharing with women entrepreneurs to help with your negotiation skills. And so I'm really excited about that. That's going to come up with, I think the launch of that will be in Vancouver on May 29th, I think, the Monday. So keep that date in mind, and you'll hear more about it soon. So we've touched on 3 of these actions in the action plan. Let's just find out what the other 2 are.
Well, the other one, of course, is promote and advocate diversity. So that's up to each of us, and even as the women online, you're building your businesses too. Just having that lens in mind.
And a very specific action is implement a diversity plan.
Yeah.
There are great models online, but
Even
as a starting point for your small business, or for any businesses you're involved in, or for businesses you do business with, ask them about their diversity policy. Have you put in something that looks at your own talent practices? Do you have a policy that supports women and families at work? So that's the action piece, like do something that specifically makes a change in the policies and the systems and the rules around it, whether it's in your own business or asking it for it from businesses that you work with.
So the gender budget that was just announced does that in a very tangible way, because the government of Canada is saying that they want to do more business with women suppliers. So they're saying, okay, so how do you walk the talk as a government organization? Well, we buy stuff. We want to buy more stuff from women, and so it's incumbent on us as women to actually pursue those opportunities now. So that's another topic altogether. So we can promote and advocate diversity, but then we have to act on the opportunities.
Well, exactly, and that leads into our 5th action, and that's measuring progress. So that's certainly one way where we'll be able to see the data to make sure that we're measuring it. And I think that is something we can all do, whether it's looking at the diversity in our employees, even as small business owners, or in other, there's lots of different ways, but that's a key piece for us, is to make sure that we continue to measure the progress, and most importantly also celebrate achievements, right? And that's so important for business owners, to make sure that we are acknowledging and celebrating all the great things that are being done.
So that's the 4th P in the 4 Ps of parity: praise and so Fiona, turning back to you, can you mention some programs? I mean, we've shared them through the course. Now we've got about a couple minutes before we go to questions. Can you mention a couple other praiseworthy activities that are really worth noting?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't believe in programs. I believe in leadership and culture change, because programs are not sustaining. And so this is about the CEO and the entrepreneurs on the line taking the lead, linking it to their business success, understanding that it's a critical business driver, and then making the culture change that it needs to be. I always have, as one of the sort of keeping you honest thoughts is, if this gets delegated to HR, it's going to die in HR. It has to be owned by the leader. And if you have a culture that is not an inclusive culture, it's a transformation. And if you have a transformation, it needs to have change management, it needs to have rigor and process and measurement and accountability and all the things that will make it actually a sustainable change. And so those are the sorts of things that I think organizations can do, and I've seen some do that. I've seen my own organization, we've been doing this for a long time, since the early 90s, but we've made tremendous changes. And as an example, in Canada last year, 46% of our partner promotes were women, and the year before it was 50%. If I look at our newly elected chair and CEO of our Americas practice is a woman. Our new global head of tax is a woman, and her successor in the Americas is a woman. And so if you treat it with the right level of the importance that it has, you can make change.
That's great. And there's also I would like to just sort of put a shout out to the fact that it's been proven that if a company invests in diversity, specifically gender diversity and also ethnic diversity in their employee base, they actually get higher profits. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to switch it over to the audience and just ask if anyone has a question for any of our speakers right now. This is we have a few minutes left to see if any of you have thought of a question you'd like to ask. Don't be shy.
This is Cheryl Christensen from Squist.
Hi, Cheryl.
And I was wondering if anybody would like to comment on sometimes there's some negative backlash regarding the word feminist and feminism, and also there's been some press and some Harvard articles on a bit of backlash from the Me Too movement. So I was wondering if you have some strategies or comments in terms of how we can address that.
Well, could I jump in first and just talk about the backlash against the feminism word? Because I represent Canada at the W20, which is one of the 5 permanent engagement groups of the G20. And I was in Berlin when Germany hosted the G20 in April, and there was a panel, and Angela Merkel from Germany, and Ivanka Trump, and Christine Lagarde, the head of the International Monetary Fund, and also our own International Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, and some others were on this panel, and somebody asked them, "Are you a feminist? Put your hand up if you're a feminist." And everybody did except Angela Merkel. And she looked around, and they looked at her and kind of quizzically, and it was an awkward moment. And she said, I don't know. I don't know, because there's a lot of negative baggage around the term feminism. And so Fiona referred to it earlier. She talked about how it's some people have the mistaken impression that feminism is about putting men down. But so one of the other panelists said, well, what if feminism was about equal rights to economic, political, and social conditions? And she said, oh, well, if that's what feminism is, then yes, I'm a feminist. But there is definitely this overhang, and I think that's why feminism was the word of the year last year, because people needed to look it up. Yeah. And then they found out, oh, it's something simple, and it's something basic, and it's something that's actually a no-brainer. So that's my thought about feminism. So what about Me Too backlash? Anybody want to take that on?
Well, I think it's Fiona. There is a risk with Me Too.
Yes.
I think the risk is that men become more cautious about sponsoring women, about spending time with them, and promoting them, and all of that kind of thing. And so that's why engaging men and activating their support is so important. Otherwise, this will become something more polarizing.
Yes.
I mean, Me Too is clearly the result of some extremely toxic behavior that has happened, so it's not to undermine it in any way. But if the pendulum swings so far that it stops the right sort of things that will advance women, then it'll be bad. And I don't think anybody wants that.
No,
So I think the first time that's ever been really addressed in terms of the conversation we're having right now for gender equality in BC and Canada was by the Bilateral Council on Women Leaders and Entrepreneurs that is happening between Canada and the U.S. right now. And they issued their first report on women entrepreneurs just recently, and I'll make sure that the link to that report goes out with a follow-up email. And it talks about how the kind of uncertainty about how men and women should interact in business, on business trips, and in business dinners and all that kind of stuff. It's the first thing I've ever seen that kind of goes there, and so that's it's something we have to look at. And I agree. We have to have due process. We can't just accuse people on Twitter and think it's okay for us to do that, although everybody else has to be innocent until proven guilty.
Right. No, it's a fine balance.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? So if there isn't any other questions, I'd like to maybe suggest to each of our speakers here, if you can come up with one final thought or one final resource that you think people should know about. Start with you, Jill.
I think for all of us, we're in this together. And so I think it's really important, especially as entrepreneurs, busy and multiple sort of things coming at you all the time, is to make sure that you ask for help. Make sure you reach ahead and seek out mentors and champions. But just as importantly, whatever stage of business evolution you're at, make sure you reach back too, and bring others along with you. And I think that can be really powerful.
Thanks, Jill. Go ahead, Lois.
Yeah, so for me, my challenge for you today would be to say who has influenced you positively in your life, and just go and thank them. Recognize them and tell them how much you appreciate them for what they've done for you. And then on the second part would say, who can you go out to today and do something for? How can you go make a difference in someone else's life by supporting them or advocating or championing? And I think that's how we'll
And how about you, Fiona?
Okay, well, they've got two great ones. I would say what you do matters. You can make a huge difference in anybody's life, but also if you dream big and you're wildly successful, you show the rest of the world, you show younger women that it can be done and that it's good.
Yeah.
So dream big and go for it.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is to go on weforshe.ca/takeaction and download this 2018 call to action, and post it somewhere visible in your life, and really do one of the things that the three speakers have said. So we've almost come to the end of our session, and I'd just like to thank all of you for joining us today. And I'd like to thank our speakers, Fiona Macfarlane from EY, Jill Earthy from Front Funder, and Lois Nahirney from DNA Power. You provided excellent content and answers and really stimulated some great discussion.